Okay, so here we have our specially constructed for this tutorial model. It's quite simple and it's divided into two sets of details which should be moving independent of each other. So the main body and the knob. Let's start with the main body. Let's duplicate it and then name it as the main LP for the low poly, right? Let's work on it first. Let's delete all the unnecessary details that we don't want to be in our low poly. Let's now duplicate it again, but this time duplicating the low poly. And let's all boolean it into one body. So Q for boolean and Q for union boolean. Let's change the color to make it easier for ourselves to manage those, so we don't accidentally do something we want to do with one body to another. Let's now cut a face, because we want to delete something to make it into a sheet body, but we have an unused space right here, so we can delete that. As you can see, the insides did not split into separate sheets, so we will cut the body just to make them separate. Let's now delete everything that we don't need, and let's merge the body back together. Let's now duplicate it a couple of times and hide the folder with our boolean sheets. It's also a good idea to change the material color for the low poly. Let's now select a boolean sheet and then select details that do not touch each other on the surface. After you select all of the objects, you press Q for boolean and then Shift E for intersect, and that will create our outer shells. Our original boolean sheet is now one of the details, so let's manually push it inside the folder. And let's disable all the sheets inside the folder so we don't accidentally click on them again. And then let's do the same thing again until we are done. Even though I knew that it would take 2 union sheets for our process, it's usually a good idea to make 4 or 5 of them in case the model is complex, and then just delete whatever we have left. Let's now work on the knob. Let's duplicate it. So this will be our low poly. This time we're gonna slightly change the approach. just to show what's possible. Well, this is not the optimal way. Let's boolean it together. And let's Alt J to just separate the detail, because it's going to be much quicker than to do it with intersect boolean. Looks nice. Even after it's a sheet body, we can still work on the faces and delete the stuff that we don't need. Looks good enough for our low poly. Now that we have our low poly ready, and our high poly in the exact same place, let's open Blender and use Plasticity Bridge add-on, get the model into it, turn on Live Link, and press refresh. It's gonna bring all our folders inside. Let's hide the high poly and work on the low poly first. Turn on wireframe and face orientation. Set it to n-gons and refacet. Sometimes it won't do it unless any of the bodies is selected as active. Just click on anything to do it. So let's play with the tolerance and angle a bit. Looks amazing. It's so funny to see this producing less gaps than a $2,000 software. So let's now use Mark Sharp and put it into a separate collection, low poly. Let's now work on the high poly. Same thing, select everything, doesn't work, click on something, refacet, it works now. And let's make it a bit higher resolution. Looks good enough, we don't have to go super high. Let's move it into a separate high poly collection. And delete the rest. Now select everything, scale it up to make it a reasonable size. I'm gonna scale it by 10. That's also a reason why I didn't delete the original cube before, so I could use it as a size reference. Let's turn on the wireframe. Go to Edit Mode, select a sharp edge, press Shift G and select Similar by Sharpness, and then mark them as seams. Let's turn on face orientation. And let's quickly fix the gaps that we might have in certain places. Let's turn on vertex snapping and just move them in place. Here I'm gonna create some extra geometry. No gaps here. No gaps here as well. A little gap here. Okay, looks good. Let's now unwrap it. Let's put a checker map to see if everything is correct. And here we see a problem. Let's add seams into our circular shapes. Don't forget to check for overlaps every now and again. Let's quickly check the main edges for alignment issues to avoid aliasing. I'm trying to check if it's aligned with UV, and I don't really think so. So let's quickly align it ourselves. I'm gonna use text tools for that. I'm gonna use the alignment tools and pin vertices in place, pressing P. And let's quickly unwrap everything, but I probably should have just unwrapped that details that I fixed. Now I'm gonna apply an arbitrary texel density, let's say 10 to everything in the scene. Yeah, I'm gonna select the important elements, and after that I'm gonna select pretty much every face that I want to have a higher resolution. And I'm gonna set the texel density to be 20, so 2 times bigger than the rest. Let's now work on our high poly. So the maximum in the preset with 3.5 is clearly a bit too low for our model. I'm gonna go 8 on the top, 2 on the bottom, and somewhere in between. Just gonna set the presets right away to make it easier for us to experiment. Let's select smaller details and apply a slightly sharper bevel to them. We can also go to edit mode and turn on the preview to colorize our edges. Now we can just select the geometry that we want to be sharper in edit mode. I'm setting my camera to check it in a separate window. And let's experiment with it. It was kind of hard to use any of the pre-made values, so I quickly made a new one. Five looks fine. I can notice that details on the sides might be a bit sharper. Okay, that's good enough. Let's now set our bake groups. Let's first batch rename the high poly. So I press Ctrl F2, set name, new, and HP. Same thing for the low poly. Let's now just make everything visible and select all the details that do not touch each other by double clicking. So we would select both the low poly and the high poly version of it. Now that we have our first set ready, let's move it into a separate collection. Let's call it 1. And the same thing for the rest. So it's gonna be in our bake group number 2. Let's now merge all the high poly variants into one and all the low poly variants into one in each respective bake group. And now let's rename it. So in the first bake group, it's gonna be 1 underscore high poly and 1 underscore low poly. And for the second, it's gonna be the same way. 2 underscore high poly and 2 underscore low poly. I mean HP and LP. Okay, let's quickly pack our low poly. Let's set the pixel margin and turn on advanced heuristics with heuristic search. As we can see, we are limited with the length of our stripe on the knob. So I'm gonna quickly divide it into 2 UV islands. Let's now go to UV tools, turn on the checker map, and pick the pixel density from it before. After that, you unwrap it and then apply the previous pixel density. Now the packing is going to be much better. It is now time to do a test bake. Let's select the first bake group, go to text tools, and let's just bake it as a test with gauge extrusion and ray distance set to 0. As we can see, even from the UV editor preview, it looks problematic. Let's press preview texture. Because it was an add-on for all the versions of Blender, it's going to be put into a different input. So let's manually fix it, and it looks terrible. So for our next test bake, let's increase the gauge extrusion and the ray distance. Looks much better. Let's quickly change the material properties to better see the bake. And we can see a weird spot on the edge. It's also a good idea to always apply all transforms, just in case. So let's now increase gauge, extrusion and ray distance even more and do another test bake. That fixed it completely. Let's now select everything. In case you don't want to bake everything in high res and you want to save render time, you can just manually bake it without any add-ons, going to render tab and bake, copying our settings and unchecking clear image. Don't forget to manually select the shader node with the texture before pressing bake. Let's finally bake everything. So select everything. I'm gonna set my texture to be 4K with 8 pixel padding and I'm gonna press bake. Let's now bake object normal for everything as well. And finally, let's bake our element ID. Let's go to the render tab and save our baked textures. Merge the low poly. Triangulate it. And export our low poly as an FBX. In Substance Painter, drag and drop our FBX and add all the textures that we have baked previously. Let's now put our previously baked textures into the intended slots. And we are going to bake the rest into the Substance Painter itself. So I'm gonna bake at 4K. I'm gonna turn on ignore backface for ambient occlusion. And I'm gonna generate the curvature from the normal map. Let's press bake. And we have it ready for texturing. While right now the automatic tolerance works quite well because we don't have a lot of details, usually whenever you export with just an ID map, they're gonna be quite close in terms of color, so you might need to lower the tolerance on the mask. I guess we are done now.